thank you, every single one of you, for all that you do for Israel. Thank you for all that you do to fight anti-Semitism around the world. I thank you for what you do for the American Jewish community. As many of you might know, if you don't, I tell you now, my brother Cam is a proud member of the community. He converted to Judaism 30 years ago before marrying his wife, Kathy. And this morning, I'm proud to say he started as acting Secretary of Commerce Department. For more than a century, AJC has been a partner and a pioneer in defining the relationship between American Jews and Israel, and a leader in strengthening that relationship. Now, I know there is no issue so close to your hearts as the future of Israel's security. The threat from Iran, the unrest in Syria, the questions surrounding nuclear weapons and chemical weapons, the lingering fallout of the Arab Spring, the status of a peace process that is hardly a process at all of these matter tremendously to each and every one of you, and they matter above all to Israel's future. And Israel's future is what I want to talk to you about today. I had the great honor of becoming Secretary of State in February. I visited Israel in March, April, and May, and I will be back soon. And each time that I go, the deep personal connection that I feel with the state and the people of Israel is only strengthened. These are actually bonds that reach back into my own family tree, including relatives I never met and never even knew about until the last decade, relatives who perished in the Holocaust, relatives I thought about in new and personal ways. On Yom HaShoah, when I laid a wreath on behalf of the United States at Yad Vashem, and it was an extraordinary privilege to spend that day alongside survivors and veterans, and to sit at that ceremony between President Peres on one side and Prime Minister Netanyahu on the other, the father of the State of Israel, and a man who I believe can lead Israel into a new era that we very much want to see. These personal bonds have been reinforced during quiet walks through the sacred spaces of Jerusalem and in the nervous neighborhoods of Sderot and through the bustle of downtown Tel Aviv. These are bonds that I felt on my first trip to Israel in 1986, almost 30 years ago. I carry with me the commitment of President Obama, whose administration, I am proud to say, has done more than any before to ensure that Israel's future is strong and prosperous. Never has our security agreement been as great. Make no mistake, the President and the United States and I share your unshakable commitment to Israel's security. And every time we land at Ben Gurion, I think of the words of one of the most prominent successors of Ben Gurion, that's Golda Meir. She said, "We only want that which is given naturally to all peoples of the world, to be masters of our own fate, not of others." Central to Israel's founding is the belief that this state and the Jewish people must be able to control their own destiny. And that is why and how Israel has built this thriving democracy. It is why Israel made the desert bloom and built a modern economy. It's why Israel has built one of the strongest militaries on the planet, and why it has always shown such a strength in the face of terrorism and existential threats. So I come here today to affirm to all of you that we are deeply committed to Israel's security. And I understand what it means when Prime Minister Netanyahu looks me in the eye and says, "I have to guarantee the security of my country." I understand that, and he does, and he will. But what does that security look like? Certainly, it's more than simply the absence of war. For Israel, a nation with history and challenges unlike any other, it means secure and being secure in its future as a Jewish state, but also a democratic state, also an economically thriving state. Security for Israel means freedom from pernicious attacks on its legitimacy from its neighbors or on the world stage. Security for Israel grows with the empowerment of moderates in the West Bank and Gaza and throughout the region so that extremists are isolated rather than promoted and empowered. And lasting security for Israel requires regional stability and open markets that will let Israelis concentrate on building up their businesses and not just their defenses. You and I both know that the place where all of this happens best is in a strong, secure Israel that lives peacefully alongside a viable Palestinian state. I will tell you here today, examine every possibility, all of the parameters of this conflict, this frozen conflict. And I will tell you, a realistic, one-state solution simply does not exist for either side. My friends, I have been traveling to Israel as Secretary of State now for just the last 3 months. But I have been involved intimately in these challenges for the last 3 decades. And as you know, I come to this issue not as a stranger, but as a friend, as a proven friend, over 30 years or more. I've gotten to know every Israeli prime minister since Shamir, and many of the kings, princes, and presidents who have ruled in the Arab world over the last 30 years. In that time, I have heard all of the arguments for why it is too difficult to end this conflict. Now, I know some of you are skeptical. I understand where that comes from. It's never given birth to a state, and it won't. Challenges are not met by giving in to doubts. Israel has only gotten this far because brave people were willing to defy the odds and ignore the conventional wisdom and actually overcome obstacles. How else could you make fertile land out of the desert and do what Israel has done? Why should we start? Why should any Israeli start giving in to that cynicism now? I believe that if we care about the future of Israel, as I do and I know you do, and if we understand what is at stake, we should recognize that this time is, in fact, a significant opportunity, and it is more than that, it is a responsibility. Now, some say that in the aftermath of the Arab Spring, it's too messy, it's too uncertain. But in reality, the dawn of a new era in the region is exactly the kind of time to recast Israel's relationships, to change the narrative with a new generation that is starting to make its voice heard. Last weekend at the Dead Sea, I described an economic investment initiative for the Palestinian territories, led by Quartet Representative Tony Blair, that will be different in scope and in process than anything that has preceded it. We know that this conflict, my friends, is not the cause of problems in the Middle East. Indeed, it has often been used as a convenient excuse for autocrats who didn't want their own populations to recognize and wrestle with the inadequacies of their own governance. An excuse, but make no mistake, resolving this conflict for both sides can have far-reaching benefits that will be in everybody's interest. And the reverse is also true. Not resolving this will result in serious consequences for both. I understand that many of you are asking, Manishta na. What makes this different from every other time? Well, the difference is that what happens in the coming days will actually dictate what happens in the coming decades. We're running out of time. We're running out of possibilities. And let's be clear, if we do not succeed now, and I know I'm raising those stakes, but if we do not succeed now, we may not get another chance. So I want to ask you this. Whenever you think about this challenge and how hard it is, think about what will happen if it doesn't work. We will find ourselves in a negative spiral of responses and counter-responses that could literally slam the door on a two-state solution, having already agreed, I think, that there isn't a one-state one, and the insidious campaign to delegitimize Israel will only gain steam. Israel will be left to choose between being a Jewish state or a democratic state, but it will not be able to fulfill the founders' visions of being both at once. And the consequences of failure do not live only in the distant future. This is not some far-off concern, my friends. There are also some very real short-term consequences to consider, because the status quo is simply not sustainable. A stalemate. The United States of America will always have Israel's back. We will always stand up for Israel's security. But wouldn't we both be stronger if we had some more company? With the right choices and enough courage and determination, there is a very different future possible for Israel. So I ask you today, don't just look at what may happen that's negative. Look at the possibilities. I ask you to recognize that this time can be different, but this time it actually has to be. People have spent so much time lamenting what hasn't worked in the past that I believe we've actually forgotten to focus on what the future could look like if we do keep faith. Think of the security benefits. An Israel where school children actually run around a playground without having to run into bunkers and shelters to escape the incoming rocket fire. I've been to Sidero. I've seen those hundreds of casings that are displayed there that have been fired out of Gaza. I went to Kiryat Shimon up in the north and went into a bunker where kids had to hide from the Katyusha rockets coming in from Lebanon. I know that fear. We can see a difference where you have a world where extremists and their state sponsors can no longer use this festering conflict as an excuse or a rallying cry for any number of hidden agendas. And we could see an Iran that is increasingly isolated. And think of the economic benefits for the average Israeli citizen. The governor of the Bank of Israel said a peace agreement with the Palestinians could boost Israel's GDP by as much as 6%. An agreement with the Palestinians that resulted in the normalization of relations with the Arab world, promised by the Arab Peace Initiative, would end the Arab League boycott of Israeli goods, open huge new markets for Israel, bring new foreign investment and business opportunities to Israel. And imagine the possibilities, if you had peace, of the extraordinary array of religious sites that suddenly become available from Jordan through the West Bank and into Israel. The end of political and logistical barriers could turn Tel Aviv into a global hub for international finance and technology. And the possibilities for tourism, as I mentioned, are simply extraordinary. An area where Israel actually currently underperforms its potential and other countries in the region. They're limitless, with a rich collection of historical, archaeological, religious sites, as well as the modern attractions. My friends, quite simply, peace pays. And Israel's vibrant society and economy and its scientific and technological achievements, all of them, would suddenly receive a recognition that they deserve on the world stage, with the barriers broken down and the ability to move within the region, with embassies, with recognition, with governments, with peace. That is what the future actually could produce. Now, I've asked you to think today about what happens if this fails. And I've asked you to think about what happens if this succeeds. The third thing I want to ask you to think about today is probably the most important. I want you to do more than just consider the consequences. I ask you to recognize that you have a part to play in choosing which future will become our own. You should also know that you're not going to be alone. The Arab League came here to Washington, and they've just shown that they are ready to take steps forward because they reaffirmed the Arab Peace Initiative, but they did so differently than ever before. They added that it will have land swaps for the first time.